I figured I'd start off by telling just a little bit about myself. Yeah, I signed my papers for the Navy when I was 17, and I did 6 years on active duty. And then I spent the next 25 years in aerospace and defense manufacturing. The last 15 of those years, I had my own business. And then about 6 years ago, I wound that business down and found myself somehow sitting in the first night of a 2-year acting curriculum. I tell you, the thought of acting never once entered my mind, but I fell in love with it, and now I play at it every day. Well, that and tell my stories, which brings me to this one. I was remembering all those nights sitting in my backyard drinking beers and just listening to the stories told by my brother-in-law and his buddies. They're all team guys, Navy SEALs. Man, my mind would just run amok. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to write this one for those crazy bastards. So our story is called Coup d'etat, and it's about 2 former Special Forces operators who have turned private contractors. Now, when their VIP client is targeted for assassination, well, they're forced to fight a vicious gang of mercenaries floor to floor in a bloody battle to save her life. Well, our story, it starts when the president of a small African nation, he's assassinated in a very remote area of his country. Now, his government doesn't know he's been assassinated yet. All they know is that his motorcade didn't arrive back when it was supposed to. Well, now, the second in line to the presidency is the prime minister, an African woman, and she's just arrived in the U.S., and she's accompanied by, well, the African Secretary of the Senate and a 3-man African security detail. Well, now, the African ambassador in D.C., he ain't trusting nobody till he finds out what happened to the president. So he reaches out to an old friend of his, the general, who is just like a father to the prime minister. Well, now, the general, he turns him on to 2 of the best shooters to have ever covered his ass. Now, we're thinking Die Hard, right? But instead of John McClane, think more of a Riggs and Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon. And these are the kind of fellas you'd love to sit down and have a cold beer with, just for the stories, right? And hell, they know each other so damn well, if one of them starts scratching their ass, the other starts itching. Anyway, they end up on the upper floor of this high-rise hotel with the prime minister, when in another suite, the African secretary, he gets confirmation that the president has been assassinated. Well, he immediately turns to the head of that African security detail to tell him that they got to get the prime minister out of there and back to the embassy. But before he can get the words out of his mouth, that big bastard reaches up, grabs him by the head, wrenches, and cracks his neck. Well, now we know who our main antagonist is. Well, he gets on his tactical radio and he calls out to the other 2 security detail who are not in on the coup. But he tells them that the Americans killed the secretary and they're out to assassinate the prime minister. Well, then he gets on another walkie-talkie and he calls out to these 4 mercenaries he's got waiting outside the hotel to come in and help him do the job. Well, here's where the fighting starts, man. We got gun battles and hand-to-hand combat. There's lots of blood and lots of killing. As they cat and mouse out and up them balconies, in and out that elevator, up and down them stairwells, floor to floor, until the battle ends up in the underground parking garage. Now, unfortunately, we left one of our guys back in the hotel bleeding out. So we're down to our 1 guy and the prime minister who's taken cover behind a concrete wall, and the last surviving of them 4 mercenaries. Now, our guy, he's trying to get to the prime minister, and he's giving himself cover fire as he runs when he goes down hard. But he don't go down easy. Well, he whips that rifle between his feet, and just as that mercenary is sticking his head out, throws him out into the open. Our guy just triggers, chews that fella up. Well, our guy is just as spent as that magazine. He drops that rifle between his legs, just lays his head back on that concrete. There's a ding, and the elevator doors from the lobby open. Our main antagonist comes out here in that little submachine gun. He walks up to our guy. He ratchets that charging handle, points it at his head. When he's thrown back against this car. When he looks down at 2 bleeding holes in his chest up to the prime minister holding that pistol. When he goes to pull up that submachine gun, she lifts that pistol just at the end and pop! Right between the eyes. Well, she kneels down next to our guy, but he just mumbles something. And some weeks later, she's standing on a stage and she's got her hand on the Bible and her hand in the air. And then she's standing at that lectern and she's speaking to all these dignitaries out in the front of the stage. And she speaks of her colleagues and she looks down to the African ambassador from D.C. sitting in the front row. And then she speaks of family. And well, she looks to the general sitting right beside him, looking back at her just so proud. And then she speaks of friends and those that would sacrifice their lives for hers. And she turns and looks over her shoulder to our 2 guys. One's leaning on a crutch, the other's leaning on a cane. They're bandaged, they're beaten, and they're bruised, but they're back to fight another day.